Good morning. Buenos dias. Bonjour. Muaramutse. Guten Morgen. Can you hear me? Can you hear me at the very back? Was that a no? That was a yes, it was a no. Technicians, could we have a little bit more volume, please? Welcome. How are you all today? Now that's what I call enthusiasm. Thank you. Could you please close the doors? We are leaving. Welcome to the GPSA Forum 2018. My name is Simon. I am an independent consultant and I design events and I do master of ceremonies and facilitation work with you, for you, and I was thrilled to be asked back. I was with you last year. I was thrilled to be asked back by the team to come and moderate and facilitate and lead you through this journey over the next 2.5 days. So thank you for having me back. I promise to do my best. Just to see who you are. You remember, is anybody here who was here last year? Very good. Is anybody here who was here for, there have been 5. This is the 5th GPSA Forum. Has anybody been here for 2? 2? Good. Anybody been here for 3? 3. Anybody been here for 4? Ooh, it's shrinking a little bit. Anybody been here for 4 who is not World Bank? Yes, there's a lady back there. Oh my gosh. It's so amazing. And then is there anybody here, wait for it, who's been here all 5? Nobody. You, oh, there's a gentleman in the middle there. But are you World Bank? You're not. All 5. Congratulations. Congratulations. So could you give us a quick synopsis of what happened in event 1? Perhaps not. So we look forward to seeing you. What, pardon? No, I was really joking. It's all right. We'll talk afterwards. We will look forward to welcoming you in the next, for number 10, too. So we have a packed and sensational agenda ready for you, which I'm going to show you in a little while. If you're looking around the room, you will see very small signs which says guest password. That's your Wi-Fi password. You might want to start logging into Wi-Fi because in a little while we're going to ask you to download the app if you haven't already done so. First, we're going to start off with some opening and welcoming remarks from our beloved GPSA Program Manager, Jeff Tindwa. Please give him a very warm welcome. Come on up, Jeff. Don't be shy.
All right. It's so good to be here and to see so many familiar faces. Thank you so much, Simon, for your kind introduction. 2 little secrets, Simon, I didn't tell you, which is that we conducted a survey of participants from last year, what it is they really liked about last year's Global Forum. It's just an overwhelming verdict. It was Simon Fowler. And we thought, really? Everybody said Simon Fowler. The second is we started to see people asking, when we launched the call for participants to the forum, they were asking, who is going to be the MC? And each time we answered Simon Fowler, there was a positive response, I'm going to come. So it's good to have you back here. Clearly, people love your Master of Ceremonies skills and can't wait to see you in action this week. And good morning, friends and partners who've taken precious time from your daily work to be here at the GPSA Global Forum, the 5th GPSA Global Forum. We appreciate your solidarity with the mission of the GPSA, your enthusiastic participation in the knowledge and learning offerings that we give year-round, whether face-to-face or through webinars. We have co-created this Global Forum this year with 3 wonderful partners: the International Budget Partnership, IBP. Where's Warren? All right, somewhere there. And the and GIFT, Global Initiative on Fiscal Transparency, on Pablo, and of course the Human Capital Index of the World Bank, somewhere in the room, Dina or Emily. We appreciate your partnership in this effort. We are excited about this year's theme, and hope you are too. Money matters. Public finance and social accountability for human capital. That's the theme. And it really goes to the heart of how countries can succeed in lifting people out of poverty and in ensuring that everyone shares in prosperity. That's why we chose it. In the 2.5 days or so that we are going to be together, we'll be seeking to learn a bit more how countries' public finances can best be invested in people to improve their productivity as members of society, and importantly, how citizens and civil society organizations and other groups can contribute to that goal. The forum will also assess what has been achieved through social accountability work in public finance and in the sectors, where we fall short of our aspirations, and what opportunities and challenges lie ahead. As social accountability practitioners, most of you are involved at the very front lines of action, tackling corruption and challenging and addressing inefficiency in the use of public money to ensure that it is used well for health, for education, for infrastructure, for social protection and other priorities. This forum is really an invitation to think practically on the ground. Practically on the ground, how does social accountability work? How does it contribute to reforms in health, in education, and other areas? How do we sequence and integrate our work with the sectors, with sector colleagues? What is the role of global advocacy? What about national policy dialogue? And where do citizens and civil society come into that equation? We will also grapple with issues of context, both how we adapt to context, but also how we tackle some of the challenges that have become all too familiar, that continue to constrain your agency as development actors. You know the themes that I'm referring to here. So let's find better ways to work across our diverse constituencies. Let's invest in coalitions and alliances and bring our best knowledge and experiences to bear on the challenges that will be surfaced at this forum this week. This is a partners forum. We can't overemphasize that. And to that end, we really hope at the end of it all, you will feel a bit more equipped than you were when you came in to function, to operate in the spheres of public finance and social accountability. That you'll be able to work better, collaborate better with public authorities and with other stakeholders in catalyzing more and better investments in human capital. And last but not least, we once again want to go green this year, like we did last year. So I'm asking you to definitely download the 2018 GPSA Global Partners Forum app. You will see in there forum updates, information about the speakers, and breakout sessions in real time. You'll connect too with other participants at the forum. I truly, truly hope that for you this is an enriching experience, that you will feel a little empowered by virtue of being here this week, and that it's going to be an unforgettable global forum. And when we do our polls in future, we'll look back and say that was something of a high point because of the salience of the issues of this week. So please go out there and make new friends, connect with old friends, and have plenty of fun too. On behalf of the GPSA, on behalf of my colleagues in the Governance Global Practice, on behalf of our sponsoring partners, a big, big, big welcome to you to the GPSA Forum this week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff.
Simon.
Thank you, and we'll hear more from Jeff as we go through the next couple of days. So, for the next few minutes until our first panel at 10:30, I wanted to tell you about what we're going to do and give you an idea of some of the fun coming your way, who we are, why we're here, and so on. Let's start. Can I have the slides up, please? Here we are. So you've met Jeff. You all know Jeff. For those of you in the first year here, a very warm welcome. I want to tell you a little bit about some of the fundamentals of this event. Let's start with the team that constructed this event. Long nights, long days, sleepless nights. Some of them are still asleep, I think. Would you please give them all a very warm thank you? And I'm sure you'll get to know some of them as they're wandering around and meet them and enjoy some time with them. So this is the 5th edition of the Global Partners Forum, as Jeff mentioned. The theme, just to repeat, money matters, public finances, and social accountability for human capital. Now we're going to have a little poll in a minute to find out what you know about human capital. This is not something new. It may be given a new title this year, but it is not something new. Human capital is not something that we are just going to learn about. But what we are going to learn about over the next day is why is it important at this moment in time, and what are we going to do differently and do better in linking human capital and public finances. So we have, and we expect, over 300 participants. This room is filling up nicely. How many of you have actually flown in from other countries? And will you shout out a country? Where have you come from? Jamaica. Jamaica? I love it. Good. Indonesia. Nigeria. Virginia? What was that? Who? Uganda. I didn't hear the one in the middle. India. Sierra Leone. Australia. Good, good. Anybody from Europe? Germany. Herzlich willkommen. Georgia? Brazil. Georgia the country, not Georgia the state. Yes, good. Mauritania. You can only be from one country, sir. Oh, okay, good. It's okay. Mauritania? Nepal? 4 countries, very good. This gentleman here came from everywhere. All right, good. Thank you very much for coming. Now, as Jeff mentioned, you conducted a little survey last year at the end of the event, and I understand they sent you a little note and asked you for your thoughts on this event. Thank you for doing that. It helps them, the team, construct the agenda and the sequence and the flow and the types of sessions you want. So here you see Last year, in 2017, we had 10 plenary sessions where you sit and you talk, you listen to the panel and what's going on the stage. You said, and our audience voted, have a little less of that. So we've got 6 of those this year, very important, and they will set the scene for each day. Today being a day about human capital, and tomorrow being a day about public finance. We have 24 breakout sessions. Now, many of these are led by you, the partners. And that's very important because you also said last year, we want to get more involved. So here we are, you're getting involved. There were 17 last year. And very importantly, there are going to be 4 working sessions, which I will lead you through, where we're going to ask you to work. Is there anybody who doesn't want to work here? There's one gentleman there, good. Can we talk a little later about that, perhaps? So we want you to work, we want to get you to work together, and we want the outputs of all of you to lead us out of this room on Wednesday afternoon. So this is not you doing it for the GPSA, or certainly not for me, but thank you. But I'm going to try to encourage you to work together in teams, and we'll have structures of how we do that as we go through the event. There will also be plenty of networking opportunities. We have nice long coffee breaks, nice long lunches, and we have a social engagement session this evening, a cocktail hour at 5:30. So to get us there, that's my job. We also have a dedicated webpage on the GPSA Knowledge Platform. So are you all familiar with is anybody not familiar with the Knowledge Platform, the so-called KP? Anybody not familiar with it? See, that's the thing. When you ask somebody if they're not, they are very, very shy. You can be honest. You're among friends. Thank you. We have a lady here. Good. That's okay. We have a knowledge platform on the GPSA website, which we want you to get to know. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to show you a little bit more about that. All of our sessions are being live streamed. Now, that doesn't mean to say you run back to your hotel, put your pajamas on, and watch. Please stay with us. I might do that. And one of the sessions, the next session at 10:30, is going to be put on the World Bank Live, which is another streaming media, which is even bigger than World Bank Live, live streaming. So don't ask me how the difference is, but they are different. And we have many volunteers. Do we have any volunteers in the room who could show their hands? It's very bright out there. But there are many volunteers, they just don't raise their hands. But if you have any trouble, please come and see one of us. There are some here, some at the doors. There's one there with a hand up, thank you. Make sure you don't get stuck or lost, just ask. Your mission is to get involved, basically. Listen to hear what you're hearing, contribute to what you're hearing, ask questions about what you're hearing, challenge. And most importantly, please make sure you share in the outcomes. If there's things you agree or don't agree with or want to involve or want to influence as you leave this room on Wednesday, this is your opportunity to do so. So these outcomes are going to happen. The question is, are you going to be on board with them and are you going to get involved? How'd you like our tables? You like the tables this year? Last year that was very popular. It's Halloween tomorrow, for those of you who celebrate Halloween. So we thought we'd spook up the tables a bit. But just because you're sitting in this seat today doesn't mean that you say you have to sit there tomorrow. So please move around day by day, session by session, meet new people, get to know them, exchange business cards, exchange social media, and get involved. Now over here on these screens, we also have a live Twitter and blogging going on with our Twitter and bloggers over here. Thank you to you. We also have, for those of you who don't like to twit or tweet, we have the old-fashioned social media. So anybody like to write with hands? The same lady who has been here 4 years likes to write. You can write stickies and put them up here, anything you want. If you need something, if you have a suggestion, if you want to contact somebody, this is our bulletin board, and you can use that if you're not so happy doing all the electronic stuff and gizmos. And in a minute, we'll show you the forum app. Now, each of you, as you walked in the room, were given one of these. Do you all have one? crucially important. You know what to do with them, right? Wear them every day, please. Wear them with pride. It doesn't matter if it's not your name. Just wear one. You will not get lunch without it, and you will not get breakfast without it, and you will not get back in tomorrow for day 2, which will be equally exciting without it. As I say, have one, write some name on it, just wear it, please. Very important. You will also hear, those of you here last year will remember, we have these bells, and the bells bring you back into the sessions. You will hear them outside of there and possibly in here. And you will naturally start to salivate. And you will want to come back into the room. When you hear the bells, please come back in. We want to make sure we are absolutely running on time. And we will try to finish certain sessions early, but we don't want to start them late. And we have, as I said, many, many, many sessions with many speakers who put a lot of work into these sessions, and they want your attention. They want you to be there. What do we got next? Here's the app. So as you start to download it, I'm going to show you a quick demo. Thank you, Donovan. This is Donovan, my right-hand man here. So we are going to just show you how to do the app. I'm going to log on. I've already logged on, so I can't show you how to download the app. 2 seconds. Talk for 2 seconds. How are you? Good. Lovely. Very nice to have you here. So, did you all hear the bells? See, I can see people dribbling already. That's exactly what we want. Come back to the sessions. Are we ready to go? No? Okay, so let's just see. You go to Crowd Compass Attendee Hub on your App Store, either a Google or, Google Play on the App Store. Search for that. You don't have to do it now. You'll have time to do it all day. Some people are being very smart taking pictures of that. Take a picture of that and you can do it throughout the day, throughout the morning session. You will need the app by the time you get to lunch. You will have to search for the Global GPSA Partners Forum. And when you see that, this beautiful sort of teal blue app will pop up. Then you download that, complete the registration and profile. It's very important that you do your profile so that we know who you are and you know who you are, and then you can network with everybody as well. And I'll show you those things any second. We're just trying to connect my phone so we can show you live what's going on. Are we having a technical issue? Are you all downloading? Lovely. Thank you. Should we come back to that? Let's come back to that. Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. And I'll be able to show it to you at different times of the day. Let's just go back to my slides then. Are you ready? Yes. You're ready. Okay, see, my name is also flexible. So I have a little dongle here, and I've got the phone attached to the screen. So you can see now, this is my app. And as you can see on the screen, we have a forum brief, a welcome video. I'm not going to show you that. The welcome letter. What's very important, I'll show you a couple of features. Over here, we have a thing called the activity feed. So when you are on your app, you're going to see notifications coming onto this activity feed, and you'll be able to say, this was a great session. We loved the session with Annette Dixon. Make sure you say that. Yes, please. And things like that. And you can say the lunch was delicious, or you can say, I want to solicit information on a certain topic, but you put this is your social media wall on the app. This is one of them. We also have, most importantly, the agenda. So today is Tuesday the 30th. If you click on the very first session, for example, you will see that it takes a moment. And what it'll show you is the session, and you will see how many check-ins there are. Nobody's attending that session. That's because you haven't downloaded the app yet. Don't worry. And if you go down further, you can do things. You can set your own schedule. So you can add this to your schedule and create your own. You will see the speakers involved. And down here, very importantly, you will see a session evaluation. I would like you, please, to evaluate every single session. It's very easy. It's a click of your thumb or any of your fingers on one of these buttons, 1 to 7, and this information will then be stored in the app for the team to actually use afterwards. So very, very helpful for us. Please do that. And you can do that with every session. Then, what else do we have? Lunch. So you will see each one here. So I don't propose to go through the whole day because you'll have this when you have it on your app. But you can add these. You see the green check to the right is where I've added it to my schedule. When you're in the app, you will see a plus sign, and then you can just add that to your schedule. Over here, we have a list of participants. And as you all start to register and put your photograph, this will become live. Some of them have already maybe done that. I don't see many at the moment. But you will have your photograph there, and then you can start to communicate with each other. Put your email and phone number if you wish, and people will find you. Very important is the list of speakers. You can see the speakers by name, and you can bookmark them. So I'm sorry, Annette, I'm going to show you. This is Annette. Since you are A in the alphabet, it's very helpful. Thank you for being that person. And it has a little bio, and you can bookmark them, and you can make a note about these people. And you can see where they are presenting if you want to follow a certain person. So there's masses of different features. The last thing I want to show you is the live poll. Excuse me. So if you go into this live poll, we are going to do a poll, which brings me to my next order of business. Thank you very much. Let's go back to the screen and let's get ready to do a poll. So if you'd like to all get your phones out, I'm challenging the technical team by switching through so many different devices. PK, are you okay? He's left. Oh no, he's still there. Good. Let's just go back to my slides, please. I didn't give them any notice. What I'd like you to do is get your phones out, and on the tables in front of you, there are, at the end of each table, there are a stack of papers. One is a form called the Forum Outcomes Form. Could you pass those down, please? You're going to need those. So you remember at the beginning I said I'm going to ask you to work. Okay, here we are. Where are my slides? Put the slides up, please. As we go through the next 3 days, today we are going to set you a forum challenge. And we are going to invite you to work together to respond to the challenge. The challenge will unfold as the day evolves today, and you will have a chance at 4:15 to hear more about that challenge with the CEO of the World Bank, and then we will recap and have a little exercise at 5 o'clock. And today I just want to show you what the forum outcomes might look like for you as personal, and then we'll set the forum challenge at about 4:15. We'll have a little session at 5 o'clock to do some personal goal setting. Then tomorrow we will spend about an hour and a half working together on addressing this challenge, and it has to do with human capital and the public finance investment in human capital. And then on day 3, we will ask you to report back in groups. So it's a little similar. If you were here last year, we had a similar session. But today, this year, we're going to start it off at the very beginning and weave it all the way through. So for the person who didn't want to work, now is a good time to leave. Hold him down, please. So on the forum outcomes form you have in front of you, I have one here for you. There are 3 questions, and I'd like you to think about those today and complete this form by the end of today. So the first question, I'd like you to look at that now, and the first question asks quite simply, what is your primary reason for attending the forum? It might be just because you wanted to hear Jeff speak. It might be networking, but I think it's much more deep than either of those ideas. So take a moment and write down why you are here. What are you trying to get out of this for you as individuals? Not necessarily for your organization, for you. Later today, we will answer questions 2 and 3, which are more organizational. And they will help us construct what the outcomes might look like for the forum, in particular in the field of social accountability and the Human Capital Project. And then what we're going to do, we're going to ask you, where's my poll? I'd like you to then to go with your phones to polleverywhere.com GPSA forum. Corrected, it's pollev.com, pollev.com. You can switch to the poll now. And later you'll be able to answer these polls through the app if you prefer, but right now we're going to just do it through the phone or the browser. And I want to just find out how you're feeling at this moment. I've only got 2 questions. Some people are concerned. So your choices are, I'm feeling cool as a cucumber, curious, consumed with excitement, that should read, concerned or quivering with anticipation. And everybody understand what quivering with anticipation means? Sort of shaking. Good. There's a very cool group here. Most of you are cucumbers. Consumed with excitement is lagging behind here. So we have more anticipation, we have curiosity, we have curious cucumbers, perhaps we have here. So good, that's just an idea just to get you warmed up. Now you know how to use the poll everywhere, pollev. Curious, I think that's the right answer, because we don't know what's going to happen yet, do we? And we'll have another one at the end of the day. We'll have another one at the end of the event, and then we'll see how you feel then. So let's just move on to the next question, please. So I would like to understand, and the team would like to understand, and this will actually help inform the next topic, which is our first keynote panel. Could you please describe your level of knowledge and expertise in the subject of human capital? And it's anonymous. So it doesn't matter who you are, what your level of knowledge is. We want to understand what is the level in the room. No clue, I'm a beginner in the subject. I have some basic understanding of the subject, but no direct experience, but that changes this week. So thank you, you're very, very positive about that. There's 4% of you consider yourselves to be expert in the subject and can be a resource for others, for a fee, of course. I'll give you a moment to answer that. Now, I think this is probably the shape that we would have expected as we start this event. And I'm confident by the end of the event, the blue lines will start to fill up at the bottom. Good. Has everybody voted who would like to vote? All good? All right. Thank you very much. And with that, I think we are ready. We're going to go back to the slides. Just want to make sure I've covered all the topics I wanted to cover. All right, here's the agenda. Just a quick glimpse of the agenda. 10:30, in a minute, we start the first panel. At 12 o'clock, we have lunch. And just before lunch, about 5 minutes before lunch, I'm going to show you the slides of where you're going to go for the fundamentals. It's very important, so please don't leave the room until you know where you're going to go. As you download your app, you will see that you can register for the fundamental session. Please do that. It doesn't matter completely because you're going to use your feet to go to the session. You didn't pre-register, but you've got 5 choices to go to after lunch, and there are 2 rounds of it, so you actually can attend 2 sessions each. But you can use your app as the panel starts to talk, and you can see where you're going to go next. It's very important so that you know where you're going to go after lunch. Then we have a coffee break. Then we have some very interesting GPSA spotlights, which is here. We're going to hear from 4 different organizations who are in the room, who are going to present what they do, some spotlights on them. Then we're going to have a keynote speech and a meeting and a discussion with Kristalina Georgieva, who is the CEO of the World Bank. Then we're going to wrap it up with a little session with me where we continue to fill out that form. And then we go off for cocktails. That's the size of it. Any questions or thoughts so far? Everybody happy? Caffeinated, ready? Good. Then with that, I would like to please welcome Debbie Wetzel, the Senior Director of the Governance GP. Morning, Debbie.
Good morning.
Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you.
And Debbie is going to introduce the panel and the session. Would you like a bell? Yeah. They're very, very good. This one actually came from Switzerland. And I took it off the cow. And my mic's still on, isn't it? So, okay, you don't need that. And thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here for our annual Halloween GPSA Forum. It is a real pleasure, again, to welcome you all here. I know a lot of you are coming from afar, and we are really grateful for your taking the time to be with us so we can hear your views and we can connect with each other around issues related to social accountability. I want to highlight that this year's forum is being organized with the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, the International Budget Partnership, and of course the Human Capital Project team here at the World Bank. And I'd like to thank all of them for their contributions in helping to shape the program and the agenda. So our forum today comes hot on the heels of the annual meetings in Bali, where the bank launched its Human Capital Project and the associated index, with the goal of promoting greater investment in education, health, social protection, and the other services that are needed to make sure that people in all countries are prepared for the economy of the future. The annual meetings also had a focus on domestic resource mobilization and fair and equitable taxation, how to raise the resources that are needed to support further investments in human capital, to promote more effectiveness in the resources already dedicated to these areas. So a core motivation of the Human Capital Index is to induce a race to the top among country leaders. We're expecting that it will provide a valuable tool for civil society to also hold their leaders and governments accountable for investing more and more effectively in their people. As noted by our CEO, whom you'll hear from later today, Kristalina Georgieva, she noted at the annual meetings, this may be the most significant mark the meetings in Bali will leave in the development history, to recognize the criticality of investing in people and that government expenditures in health, education, social protection are not consumption expenditures, but they are really prime-time investment. We expect and hope coming out of this work that governments will demand that these prime-time investments in these areas of education, health, social protection, and other will be a focus, not because we tell them that it should be a focus, because that they understand more and more that investing in people is fundamental for full participation in the economies of the 21st century. We also will partner with countries so that they work to use their resources effectively in building human capital and in holding them accountable for these investments. It's why at the Governance Global Practice here at the bank, we focus on improving the effectiveness of institutions. This includes the interface between policy design, decision-making, and implementation through the executive branches, parliaments, and civil society. So all parts of the system, formal and informal, state and non-state. We also work on improving the capacity of institutions, civil services as well, so governments can mobilize and allocate domestic resources more effectively while engaging citizens at all points through the policy cycle. We're constantly asking ourselves, why is it that governments so often fail in delivering on the commitments they themselves make? And why do they often fail in serving the most vulnerable? Some of you who were here last year may remember we talked about the World Development Report 2017 on governance in the law. And that report links the shortcomings of governments in effectively implementing policy and in meeting the needs of the most vulnerable citizens to the recurring issues of exclusion, of clientelism, of elite and/or state capture. That is, the whole question of the unequal distribution of power within societies and how that power is used by certain groups to perpetuate inequalities and privileges. The WDR 2017 points to the important role for citizen engagement and inclusion in addressing these power imbalances. But we've also found an important conclusion across the literature is that there is really untapped potential for citizen engagement in issues related to public finance, and hence our focus for this forum. We're only beginning to understand why citizen engagement in this area, in tax, in seeing through spending and spending results, is lagging relative to other areas. So we're going to spend some time this morning and over the next few days unpacking the Human Capital Project so you can understand what that's all about. We're going to understand how public finance plays a key role, and we're going to renew our focus on how greater inclusion and more emphasis on citizen engagement can help us all achieve better results. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite our Vice President for Human Development, Annette Dixon, to speak to us. Annette's been instrumental in the launch of the Human Capital Project and Index, and she'll tell us more about this project and where social accountability comes into the picture to make this project a success. After Annette speaks, Annette will be joined in the panel with Juan Pablo Guerrero of the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, otherwise known as GIFT, and George Osebimpe of Send Ghana, one of the GPSA recipients that has a different perspective on how the work we've done so far might be able to do more in addressing these issues. So Annette, over to you, and then we'll get started with a panel discussion. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Debbie, and thank you very much particularly for highlighting the linkages between social accountability and the Human Capital Project. I think by virtue of the fact that we're all in this room, we all understand that investing in people is actually fundamentally important, and it's the right thing to do. What we do know now, more than ever, we know just how important it is for powering economies to go forward, and particularly to reduce poverty and reduce inequalities in society. And so in that sense, I think our evidence is actually catching up with what we've intuitively known for a very long time. You know, the World Bank has always measured physical capital. That's the investments that we've made in infrastructure and the physical environment. And in the last couple of decades, we've been measuring natural capital, the endowments that countries have in their lands, forests, energy, reservoirs, and so on. What we are now able to do is to also measure human capital. And so for the first time, we've actually been able to show just how important it is. Human capital accounts for 2/3 of the wealth of the globe. At the same time, though, in developed countries, it's about 70% of wealth, and in developing countries, it's about 40% of wealth. So the deficits in human capital actually account for a huge amount of the differences between rich and poorer countries. So that's what's actually driving us to really focus on this. Now, there's actually a body, if you're interested in going back and looking at the reports that underpin this project, a couple that are really very current and very relevant. The first is a report called The Changing Wealth of Nations, which is for the first time, shows how we measured human capital and where this new thinking comes from. And there are two companion reports that go with that, which are also really important. One focusing on gender, and which shows very clearly that if women earned the same as men and participated at the same rates as men, the planet would be 20% wealthier. And the second is around the cost of not educating girls. So we've taken the same methodology to really make the advocacy case much stronger on the economic side. But there are two other reports that I think are really important. This year's World Development Report and last year's World Development Report. Last year's World Development Report highlighted the learning crisis in education. There are more kids in school than ever before, but in too many countries they're not learning enough or fast enough or well enough. And this year's World Development Report is looking at the changing nature of jobs. And this is actually compelling us to actually create this sense of urgency about the importance of countries investing more in human capital. I won't go into the changing nature of jobs, except to say that while a small number of jobs will cease to exist, the existing jobs will become more complex, and new jobs will be created that even require even more depth of skills. So the bar is being raised on all countries at the same time as we are highlighting some of the human capital deficits. So this is an agenda that's actually relevant for all countries in the world. And when we get to the Human Capital Index discussion, I want to tell you a little bit about Singapore, because Singapore came out the top of this index. But they're not even happy with where they're at either in terms of human capital. They think that their kids need to be even better prepared for the future world that they're going to live in. So I just want you to really understand this is not something which is just really an exercise in highlighting deficits in some countries. It's really trying to raise the awareness of policymakers everywhere. Now, we also know a lot more about human development and what's important. And particularly, I think the evidence on early childhood development is extremely compelling. The importance of creating the conditions for the development of the young child's brain. And it starts, of course, with the health of the mother even before conception. And this is important because nearly a quarter of all young children are stunted. And stunting is a term, it's a technical term, it sounds awful. It's a technical term that actually technically measures height for age, but it's very closely correlated with a child's brain and its development. Now, if you don't believe me, have a look at the Learning World Development Report. It has photographs of a child that is fully developed and a child that is stunted, their brains, and you can see what is missing in the brain of the stunted child, which really shows that the neural pathways are not as developed as they could be. And this is important because it actually speaks to the child's capacity to learn. Now, we also know from the Learning World Development Report that in some countries, kids have 5 fewer years of learning for the same years in school. So what we've done in this Human Capital Index has started measuring not only the years of schooling that kids are getting, which we've been measuring everywhere, and that's been going up. We're also looking at how much they're learning in those years, and I'll tell you a bit more about it. But this is really important because kids are missing out on learning opportunities, even though they're in school and their parents are supporting them to be in school. Moreover, we know that half the world's population still does not have access to essential health services today, and 4 out of 5 people are not 4 out of 5 very poor people or poor people are not covered by a social safety net, which leaves them extremely vulnerable. But the reason that we're doing this project is because we believe many countries are underinvesting. And we know that part of the problem is that there are political disincentives to investing in people. The returns take longer to show up. They don't show up in the terms of the current sets of policymakers. And so we're actually trying to use this project to create the sense of urgency. This is important, but unless it's also felt to be urgent, we won't see a significant shift. And so that's really part of the reason that we're doing this, is we want to actually create an environment for policymakers and for societies to really start prioritizing human capital investments. Now, we know it's easier in a way for a policymaker to choose to invest in an infrastructure project like building roads. And it's not that we are saying that roads aren't important, because people need roads to access services. It's a fundamental investment. But unless you invest in the people alongside the road, you won't get the productivity and the economic growth that's going to drive the poverty reduction. Now, we have 3 parts to the Human Capital Project, and I know that you're going to spend more time with our team later today, so I won't go into too much detail, but just to explain why the background, I'm going to describe it. So the first part is the index, which we've now released, and for those of you who want to, you can go online and see it, and you can see the ranking of your country, and you can see the scores of your countries, and I'll tell you a bit more about it. But it's just a beginning. We have a much bigger measurement agenda around the whole area of human capital, and which is where I think we can partner with you to really drill down and actually show the issues and the challenges that your various countries face. And then the third part, which is actually the most important part, is to engage with policymakers in a discussion about what can be done to accelerate progress, because this is an urgent agenda. Most countries are really focusing on the stock of kids, if you like, that are currently poorly skilled, don't have access to jobs and need help. But there's also the generations of kids that are coming through the system. And in countries that have a lot of population growth, very young populations, this agenda is getting even more urgent. So that's why it's really important. Now, the index itself focuses on outcomes, not inputs. And for those of you who know doing business, it's very different from doing business. Doing business is a survey which is done each year to identify whether a policy has changed and whether that policy is being implemented. Whereas this index is actually focusing on the outcomes that the population has and what that means for the next generation of kids coming through. Now, we chose the things in the index because they are directly relevant for productivity and growth. So this index is not measuring everything that's important about human development. There are many things that are important. But these are the ones where we know there's a very strong evidential link. So the first thing in the index is survivability. What is the probability that a child born today will survive to age 5? And sadly, there are still about 30 countries in the world where that is actually still a critical issue. Secondly, for schooling, how much schooling will a child complete? And most importantly, how much will they learn? And this is the most innovative part of this index, because for the first time ever, we've put the learning outcomes data into a harmonized global database, because countries are doing different tests, and we've been able to reference them and put them into a global harmonized database, which now for the first time gives us a new metric, learning adjusted years of education. So we can measure the learning gap. And I'll explain a bit more in a bit with some concrete examples. And then the third bit is about health. Will the child be stunted before the age of 5? Will they be healthy into adulthood, ready for work, and with a foundation for lifelong learning? In other words, will this adult survive for their working age? Now, as I said, the Human Capital Index is trying to create a clear line of sight between the human capital outcomes and their impact on productivity and growth. So it's actually possible with this index, when you look at the rankings, not the rankings, but the actual distance to the frontier. So if the frontier is 1, and that's the most educated, healthy workers in possible in a society, countries are ranked according to their distance to the frontier. So a child that is born today in a country that is a 0.6 has a 60% chance of reaching their full potential. But the second thing we can do is we can also tell policymakers how much economic growth a country is foregoing by their distance to the frontier. So a country that has a ranking of 0.5, in other words, they're halfway to the frontier, that country is foregoing 1.4% of growth each year for the next 20 years. So that's actually a kind of, for countries that are really trying to accelerate their growth, this is a critical underpinning for them. You know, that it shows how much potential they have to become more productive by investing in ensuring that their citizens are healthier and better educated. And so actually one thing that is important is no one country is at 1, okay? Singapore, as I said, is the highest. It's at 0.88. So even they have some room to go. So we launched this index last month at the annual meetings of the World Bank Group in Bali. And for me, this was perhaps one of the most rewarding experiences in my professional life, because we went into this exercise thinking that, like doing business, this would create a lot of discomfort amongst policymakers, and we would get a lot of criticism about the methodology, should we be doing it at all, and so on. And actually, there was almost universal acceptance that this was something really important for policymakers to focus on. And for ministers of finance, they don't often actually see the linkages between the finance that they are allocating, so the allocation decisions that they're making, and the results that they're actually getting. And so I think this index is actually providing a window for them and a window for the wider society to draw attention. Now, in many countries, this type of measurement actually needs to be supported by other things. And I'm going to talk in part about service delivery indicators, because these are measures which we've actually been doing in a few countries that are not in the index, but which are also important for policymakers, because they tell policymakers, are services being delivered, and what is the quality of those services? But that's actually something that actually should complement the Human Capital Index. But one of the things that the Human Capital Index doesn't do, and which you, I think, can create some support for, is to take the index at the national level and actually break it down to the subnational level. Because it's in many federalized countries, of course, service delivery, education and health services are delivered by subnational levels of government, provinces or states. And so it's really important for accountability that this data is actually taken to that level of government. But also, I think it's really important for speaking to underlying inequalities which underpin the Human Capital Index outcomes. And this is important because when you rank countries with these sorts of indices, we know that the countries that come out the highest, say on learning outcomes, the countries that come out the highest, that do the best in these indices, are countries that actually have very high equity of outcomes. They actually are bringing kids through at similar levels of excellence. And so they've actually, countries that have paid attention to actually the importance of actually improving equity of outcomes. And so subnational data is really important for getting to understand the underlying inequalities, who's missing out, and where are these people. The other thing is that the index is, as I said, it's those things that we know are important for productivity and growth, but they're also, we were limited by where we have data for lots of countries. So what we have in the index is the best convergence that we have between data for a lot of countries and the things that we know are important. But there are lots of things that we know are important that are not in the index, that we don't have the data. So there is really a huge agenda in actually creating demand for better data. So for example, actually there are 157 countries in this index, and actually at Bali I was really taken, there's about 30 countries that we couldn't put in the index because we didn't have the data. And a lot of these countries came to us in Bali and said, why aren't we in? We really want to be in. And that's great, because that starts the conversation about, well, we need your data to be able to do it. But there are the things that we want to measure, but we can't yet across many countries, include, of course, early childhood milestones that we know are important for health and education. The other skills that we don't test for in education systems. So we know in the future of work, it's really important that kids have social and emotional skills, the things that machines can't do, as Jack Ma would say. And so we need to be able to measure those much better to really know whether kids are prepared for the future world. And then lastly, we are not measuring anything that happens after school, both formal and informal. So formal post-school education, whether it's vocational training or tertiary education. And we're not measuring learning on the job, which we also know is really important. So those are the things that we actually still have a big agenda to measure. And so there is actually, I think, a drive for better measurement in this area. And the third component is as I said, the country engagement. And here we actually wanted to go to Bali with a few countries that actually were already understood that was important and wanted to be what we called early adopters, countries that actually would come to Bali and say, look, we actually want to develop a plan to accelerate progress. We don't have time. We don't have 3 or 4 decades to actually improve these outcomes. We need to do it in a much shorter amount of time. And we wanted to actually create a kind of sense of learning and community of practice almost between countries. We thought we might get 6 or 8 or 10 countries. We ended up with 28 countries. And these ministers got on a plane and came 2 days earlier to Bali than everybody else to work on their human capital plans. And so we were actually, I think that was the first thing that really made me realize that this agenda was really resonating. And these are ministers of finance and planning ministers. They're not the education and health ministers who normally come. Now, I think some things that are really important for you. I want to just give you some examples of how you can use this data, because we want to make this everybody's business, not just the government, not just the education minister or the health minister, but everybody's business. So, for example, and I know that the Partnership for Social Accountability, some of you are already working in this space. In Indonesia, for example, Wahana Visi, is she here? Hi. Is working with villages to ensure that the national standards for maternal and child health are being met. And in Malawi, I know that the Economic Justice Network has done some work on the school supply chain, the school material supply chain. But beyond that, I want to give you a sense of what we can learn from this index and why this is important. So in South Asia, for example, kids on average have 10.5 years of schooling, but they're getting the equivalent of 6.2 years of learning. So taxpayers are paying for 10 years, but they're getting 6 years. Parents and kids are getting 6 years in return on average. Similarly, in Africa, across African countries, there's now a good achievement. Kids are now in school for 8.1 years, but they're getting 4.9 years of learning. And I've got data for Brazil, other countries. Now, I also want to tell you about the service delivery indicators, because the coverage is much less, but I think it has huge potential. And here, as I said, we can look at the quality of services. Now, we know that in the surveyed countries, 1 in 5 teachers were absent on the day that the survey was undertaken. Across the surveyed countries, 20% of the teachers did not have mastery over the curriculum they were teaching. And in the health clinics and hospitals, 50% of the patients turning up were misdiagnosed for the 5 most common medical conditions presenting at those clinics. So you have a 1 in 2 chance of getting a correct diagnosis in these countries. In one country, you have a 1 in 10 shot of getting a correct diagnosis. And I can go on. We know that teacher absenteeism is a huge issue, and it's been well documented across many countries. But why is it important? It's not just important for accountability, it's clearly important for the kids. We know from projects that we finance where we are tackling teacher absenteeism, so we're doing financing monitoring of teacher attendance through cell phones, where when the teachers turn up, the kids turn up again at school in even higher numbers. The kids come back. It's obvious, but it's really important. So we think that making this kind of data available is really helping to create the demand for more investment and, more importantly, better investment in human capital. And so that's where I think we can work together to try and use this data to improve accountability and, most importantly, to actually accelerate progress, because we can't wait. This is really, as I said, an extremely urgent agenda. So I'm going to stop because you're going to have a lot more time on the details, and we've got some other discussants. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Annette. So I'd like to ask Juan Pablo Guerrera from the network director of GIFT, to come up and join us, and George Osebimpe, the country director for Send Ghana, to join us up here. To get their own perspectives on what they've heard this morning about the Human Capital Index. And then what we'll do, we'll have a few minutes of interaction up here, and then we'll open it up to questions. So you can be thinking about all the questions and thoughts you may have. So thank you for joining us. So George, you've just heard a lot about the Human Capital Project and this question of spending, and I know your work on the ground is dealing with issues related to accountability and spending in education. What do you think? Tell us, share with us your thoughts on the project and what you've heard.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet all of you. I would say that we were concerned about what we didn't call human capital, but what we thought was the issue of deficit in service delivery, and that poor communities, poor children, poor women were not getting access to basic services in the education and the health sectors, largely because they had not been so much involved in the budgetary processes, and that there was a need to catalyze a relationship between citizens on one hand and duty bearers as a way of addressing a collective challenge. And in doing that, we have learned quite a lot of lessons that we think that going forward, the Human Capital Project can benefit from. And if you indulge me, I want to mention a few of them. First point I want to make is that when citizens engage government, oftentimes responsiveness is high when that engagement is, first of all, backed by strong evidence. And that evidence gathering process has involved the people whose lives are at the center of the issue. In other words, who are affected about the problem. And that is very critical, something, a great lesson that we have learned in the last 4 or 5 years that we have been implementing this project. And often, hitherto we would support citizens to engage government, but when the evidence was not strong, government saw it as emotional outpouring. So that's one thing that we have learned going forward. The other thing is that a programming approach that integrates civil society and government is good for ensuring sustainability and good relationship. Through building partnership between duty bearers and government on one hand, and also building partnership between civil society organizations like us and duty bearers on another hand. And in doing that, we have been able to build a constructive relationship between government. So we see development challenge as a collective responsibility through which we must all come together as 3 interlocutors to address. We have also learned that ICT, application in social accountability, has a multiplier effect in terms of increasing citizens' voice, in terms of using for data collection and analysis in an environment where we do not yet have the right information. It has been very helpful in building an interactive, and real-time relationship between duties bearers such that information is provided in real time on critical issues that citizens are raising so far as provision of health and education services are concerned. These are some of the lessons that we have learned that I think that in embarking on a human capital development project, we can leverage and see that the problem is no longer that of the citizens on the demand side, neither is it that of government to sit somewhere to define what citizens they perceive as citizens need, but about working together in a more constructive way so that solutions are found. And in doing that, we are guided by the need to get a lot more, a lot more transparency, accountability, responsiveness, and most importantly, participation by people whose lives are affected by the things that we talk about.
Great. So this question of how to link this type of work with the problems that people, their own problems every day, this question of constructive partnerships and relationships between government and civil society, and how ICT, how technology can help be an amplifier. So one thing to think about is how to bring down this index to people, as you noted, at the closest to home in some sense, to be able to make it meaningful and use it. You also concluded with a nod to transparency, so I'd like to turn to Juan Pablo on that topic. So Juan Pablo, we've seen over the years, governments for ages have put money into education and health, sometimes considered consumption, sometimes considered investment. Why is it so difficult to get effective investment in these aspects? And any other reflections you'd like to share about the index and what you think?
Thank you so much. First of all, let me congratulate you for this effort. The way the index is built, the project that is behind it, and the way and the time in which you presented are very important for many of the discussions that we have in our countries about where to allocate the budget. Talking about relevant information, we have here a new tool to engage in informed discussions about the best use of the budget for improving development. So this is why the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency is so pleased to be part of this effort, and I thank Jeff Twingwa for making us part of the discussion in this year's edition of the GPSA Global Forum. The question of quality of public services has been, for a long time, the most difficult issue for the public financial management community. How to make sure that there is value for money. And we've tried practically everything, but recently, very importantly, at the highest level of international financial institutions and governments, there is the acknowledgement that a greater involvement of citizens in the preparation, execution, and monitoring of the budget has a positive impact in outcomes. As you know, since 2012, the principle of direct participation of citizens in the budget process has been acknowledged by the IMF in the Fiscal Transparency Code, by the PIFA indicators, by the Open Budget Survey of IBP, and other instruments, OECD too, that acknowledge, as said, the importance of the feedback of the users. Now, in this scenario, one very basic element is only now starting to be present, and that is asking the users what information is relevant for them. We've seen years of fiscal transparency efforts with governments providing reports without talking to the potential users. So one very significant happening is that now in many governments we have ministers of finance speaking with users of financial information, for instance, to provide portals. And this dialogue about the relevant information that you need in order to better check how the money is spent provides these coalitions you were talking about that sometimes address the issue of the information, but sometimes address other relevant issues about transparency and accountability. So a first important element that is new and that we should exploit is dialogue between the relevant stakeholders and the government providers of public services. I am very pleased that in your project, Annette, you include building up community of practices, where among others you're going to be looking at service delivery indicators, but other pieces of information. I really hope that these include all relevant stakeholders so we can ensure a follow-up and ownership by the users of this index. So that's the first point that I would like to make is dialogue in provision of the information that is relevant and to engagement of citizens, as George pointed out, for better provision of an impact of the use of public money.
Okay, thanks. So we know that for some time, for a few years, this principle of dialogue between governments and citizens has been there, on paper at least, but we also know that that's pretty hard in many cases to make happen, often because there's so much information. So I think this question of what is the right information, what's relevant. We're going to open to questions. I'm going to turn to Annette just with one quick question. So for those of you who have questions, are we going to have some roving mics, Simon? So if you have a question, stick your hand up so we have a few minutes for you to interact with the panel. But so Annette, Pablo raised this issue of too much information, relevant information. Can you say a little bit about how and you talked a little bit already about the index itself and the evidence embodied in that may help to propel this discussion forward. And it relates a little bit to why all these governments have stepped up and said, yes, we're interested in moving. How can we now bring civil society into the equation as part of this dialogue that governments seem to be so interested in having?
Yeah, well,
You have it,
oh, thank you. I think we, at this point in the discussion, we need to differentiate a bit between countries that are in different situations. Because there are countries that are clearly underinvesting in human development services, and there are countries that are investing but still not getting good results. So both are relevant. But the underinvestors, I mean, in some cases, these countries are just so poor they need external assistance. And so it's actually the international community that needs to work with the government to increase investment. But in a lot of cases, the governments themselves are neither mobilizing enough resource nor prioritizing. And you know, in some cases, these go together. You know, one follows the other, night follows day, so to speak. And so countries don't understand that to provide the kind of best level of access to services needed to make these investments, you know, if they don't mobilize the resources, they're not actually going to be able to meet the needs and aspirations of their population. But there's also a lot of these policymakers, including some in Bali, who say, look, I'm spending a quarter of the budget on education, and you tell me we're only getting half the years of learning for that. Then there's a big problem, and you go back to what's going on. But that's my point about it needs to be supplemented with information that really speaks from the experience of the service user back. So the service delivery indicators are a survey, but there's other ways to do it. I've seen countries where government service users are part of a WhatsApp group, and they can actually just send a real-time message. That actually has a real, you know, there's lots of different ways we can give voice to the experiences of citizens actually using services. Now, I talked about monitoring teacher attendance. I mean, there's a lot more things we can do with that. But I have to say, I started my professional life as a community development worker, and I'm a great believer in the more you get people involved in the actual services at the level of the school or the health clinic, the better the service delivery is. You know, if parents are coming into and are welcomed into the classroom, the teachers are going to show up and they're actually going to teach instead of sitting at the back of the classroom with reading magazines. Because, you know, the first challenge is to get them into the classroom. The second thing is actually getting them interacting with the kids. And the third is just questions about whether they actually have the pedagogical skills and the knowledge of the curriculum as well. But sitting behind these are lots of governance challenges that really underpin the challenges that we see in services. You know, how did people get their jobs in the first place? How did unqualified or untrained people get their jobs? I mean, we have countries where we're financing the education system and we know that some of the teachers are illiterate. You know, how does that happen? So these are really important issues that the society needs to actually start engaging to actually change these things. So I think data helps, but it's only the beginning, and unless people get engaged. So for example, I'm a great believer in school feeding programs where kids are in really poor families. It helps the kids to learn. It's often too late to help the stunting problem, but if the kids are allowed to bring their younger siblings for lunch, the mums come, you get everybody in the school and the teachers are interacting with the parents. That changes the quality of the discourse in that community.
Okay, so let's open it up to questions. Lots of topics that we could talk about. So I see one right over there. Please go ahead. Please introduce yourself, and I'd ask you to make your questions concise so that we get as many in as possible.
Thank you very much. My name's Barbara Magezi-Ndamira. I'm a senior public sector specialist working in the World Bank Uganda country office, but TTLing a GPSA program. So that's why I'm actually here. But I would like to raise one small thing about the Human Capital Index and its value addition to the dialogue with political leaderships and the ministers of finance and planning. And I see that it's a very important index, but just like the doing business was able to speak to them about increased growth, about increased FDIs, about, it links very well to economic growth. And therefore, they were eager to embrace the index, the doing business index. How do we go about getting this human capital index interesting to the ministers of finance, the ministers of health, who are more interested into health infrastructure because of the ribbon cutting and the political capital that comes out of the ribbon cutting when you open a new school, but then does not relate to the outcome. Annette has given us very good data, investing billions of shillings into infrastructure for schools and health facilities, but then you get only a percentage of that. So how do you sell that human capital index, not only to 20, but more people?
Okay,
Thank you very much.
Barbara. Over here we had one, and then I see one way in the back, and then one up in the middle. So here we go. We'll take 4, and then we'll go to the panel.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Elliot. I'm from Uganda, and I am representing Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. I'm very much interested in the discussion, but I have a question for Sandy Ghana, that is George. George, I love what you do, and that's what we really do in Uganda, but mainly I want to understand how you have managed to prioritize in terms of if you are really engaging the citizens in the budget work, who makes the decision in terms of priority areas? Because what happens in Uganda is there's where you engage the citizens to participate in the budget processes. But again, at the level of decision making, you find that the decision walls are those for only the policymakers, and engaging them has been a very big issue, of which I want really to learn from you and be able to engage. Thank you.
Okay, great, very much. So way in the back.
Good morning, Isabella Toth from Cordaid in the Netherlands. Thank you for the very interesting panel. Since we are together within the GPSA forum, I would like to hear how exactly civil society will be involved in the human capital project. Because, I mean, we know that many of the partners of the GPSA and undoubtedly many other organizations outside have excellent methodologies developed and rolled out that tackle specifically, for instance, the enhancing not only the access, but the quality of the services. So that is one thing. I don't really see how exactly would that work out at country level, when the entry point for this would be the Ministry of Finance and other governmental, the Ministry of Finance primarily. Then I have just one observation, question. I got some piece of news from Tanzania at 9:30 this morning, US time. It says that from the Dutch embassy in Tanzania, that the Tanzanian government has stopped per this morning, any kind of communication in the country about sexual reproductive health rights. So the question is, how would, this is not a standalone. Many of you would know that in Pakistan happens the same, and in other countries as well, where you have more repressive governments or more, how can I say, reactionist powers in place. What do you think, all of you, that we can do collectively to reverse this? Because, for instance, something like this, concretely on sexual reproductive health rights, would really undermine any kind of efforts and investments in the health component of the human capital investment.
Okay, one last question up in the middle. It was up towards this way, still there? Okay, why don't we go with these 3 questions? I see a number of others. I need guidance from Simon in terms of how long he wants to let us run. So, let's start with the, George, you were asked a direct question about how do you prioritize? Lots of civil society organizations and citizens have different competing priorities. Can you say a brief word about how you go ahead and work on that? And then, Annette, if you could say a little bit about generating both interest in the index amongst Ministry of Finance officials, and how exactly civil society might get involved in these things. And then we can talk about this, sort of response to more broadly about the Tanzania question that came up. And then we'll loop back for a second round if that's okay with Simon. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Pablo.
So, my sister, the prioritization does not start at a point when we are making input into the budget. And specifically in this project, we started with an initiative to build partnership with government. So even before we wrote that, one of the first key activities we did was to meet about 5 ministries, sign memorandum of understanding with them to say that this is what the project is about. As part of that, we want to have a partnership with you. In the partnership, we are going to assign ourselves roles. Then we will be checking how we are fulfilling those roles. Then we sign another level of MOU with 30 districts. That's local government. Similar arrangement where we said that we're going to have this project in your district. We would expect you to work with us. This is what the project is about. So we were as open as possible to discuss and agree on how collectively we would be implementing the project together. All those efforts culminated into securing a buy-in from the political actors. That is one side of it. So then what it meant was that any mobilization effort coming from our end in terms of going around the country, collecting citizens' input into the budget, and also working with the Ministry of Finance, with them giving us technocrats to go around the country. But bear in mind, in terms of participation, the foremost institution that has the mandate is the Ministry of Finance from the executive side, but they do not know how. Our approach was to say that we know the how. Give us the technocrats. Let us go to the communities. Let them explain to the community people what government intends to put into the budget and how will the community respond in terms of their acceptance of what government is saying or what they propose to be alternative. So we came out with citizens' alternative budget that we would submit to the ministry at the end, at the beginning of the budget development process. And that is how the prioritizing, the priorities are developed, one, from the perspective of the citizens, but then we also laid the foundation for its acceptance, given that the government side has already bought into it. So that's how it worked. But if you just permit me,
Yep.
yeah, in terms of getting the political leadership, our experience has been that oftentimes when these technical documents are reduced into an ordinary man's or woman's language, such that it speaks to my mother who lives in the village in terms of her access to education, by her children. That makes it very easy for them to speak to government to say that, according to the World Bank, you are not doing well in the case of Ghana in terms of quality education at the basic level. We have succeeded, according to this report, we have succeeded in almost getting gender parity at the basic level. But at the secondary level, there's a problem. At the basic level, there is a problem with quality. Those are some of the issues that civil society we can use as entry points to engage government in a way that we always bash government when doing business report comes out and we are not doing well. I think that another way is to say that, according to the World Bank, you are not doing well in terms of how much you are investing into human capital. That would be a good way to enter into this discussion.
Great, thank you so much. Pablo, you want to say a quick word on prioritization? You have a bit of
Yes,
exposure to that issue.
on how to convince ministers of finance I've asked some of them, why do you want citizen engagement in the budget process? And one response, common one, is so I can make sure that the resources are actually spent. As Ministry of Finance, we allocate, but sometimes we don't have much of news about how are they exerted. So now they know in many of our countries what's the impact of that implementation, at least in this very important sector. Another anecdote is another Ministry of Finance when the President decided to promote a policy that was going to have a very significant implication for the deficit. He was saying, and where is civil society now saying that this is outrageous, that this shouldn't take place? He was, of course, off the record, asking for that type of support that is needed when bad decisions are taken. But just to finish, I believe that international financial institutions have an important role, not only by providing this type of indexes, but also by the influence that they have on new institutions in the public financial management systems around the world. We know about one that is very common, and that is fiscal rules. As you know, many countries adopt fiscal rules in order to make sure that their budget is sustainable. I believe that we need a new generation of fiscal rules that clearly addresses the issue of investment in this type of future, and that addresses the issue of inequality too, as we also know that inequality impedes in the medium and long term sustainability of the budget.
Sure, okay, and we've seen in some places constitutions that say this is how much you spend on education and health, but how do we make sure that that leads to results? So, Annette, how do we engage civil society? How do we prod our ministers of finance? And maybe you can weigh in on the Tanzania situation.
Okay. Well, I think as important as the index is, so too is knowledge about what works. Yeah. And I think what we hope in the Human Capital Project to do is to show those countries that have actually made progress in quite a short amount of time. And we know some of these cases. So, for example, Vietnam has significantly improved its learning outcomes in primary and secondary education in the last 10 years. Peru has halved its stunting rate. Malawi and Senegal have done well on improving this, reducing the stunting situation. Still got way to go, but so which countries are actually making progress, and what are they doing that is actually working for them, and which might be lessons for other countries? So I think, we need to be on the case on both ends of it. I think one thing I didn't say, but which is really important, is that where we have the data, we have gender disaggregated the Human Capital Index. And this is really important for education because we can see the countries, of course, where girls' attendance lags behind boys, but there are many more countries where the learning outcomes, boys are lagging behind girls. And this is interesting because it's something that we know has happened in advanced economies, but we now see it happening in developing countries. Girls are actually accelerating. Now, why is this important? We know that women's empowerment drives economic growth and poverty reduction. We know that when countries get more girls into school, where girls delay marriage and childbearing, and more women work in the labour market, these countries have actually raced ahead in terms of economic growth and poverty reduction. So these are really important messages, and that's why the index itself is gender disaggregated, really to make this case. Now, how do we sell it? That was the other question. And for me, I think this selling it comes from showing the gap, the cost of the gap, creating this sense of urgency, and then coming as quickly with ideas on things that can be done in a positive sense. Some things take a long time, but some things pay off more quickly. Like, for example, using cell phones to monitor teacher attendance. Immediately in the province where we finance this, they help the government to eliminate 4,000 teachers who had actually left the country and were working in the Gulf states. So they were actually still on the payroll. So that's a way to sell it for a start. That's very attractive to a finance minister. But more importantly, as I said, when the cell phone monitoring started, the teacher attendance in this one case I know went from 37% to 57%, still not good enough, but the kids were previously attending at about 50%, went up to 75%. So you're immediately getting more value for the money that you're spending. So, and you're getting the outcomes that the society needs.
Okay, we're going to do one more lightning round of questions, so please be as concise as possible. We're going to go here and then there and over to this corner and then right in the middle. Okay, we'll take those 4. I know there's lots, but you have a few more days, so we don't need to get all the questions in this session. So.
Thank you. First, I would like to congratulate the GPSA for choosing this strategic time. Secondly, I would like to say that the theme is of particular interest of us in Mauritania because the project we are managing is entitled Transparency of Mauritanian Education Budget to improve the quality of educational services. Finally, I want a question to the panelists. What are the practices, the best practices that can improve education in a country like Mauritania? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So there was one in the middle. Vinay, is that you? Go ahead. Then we'll go over here. Next one is over here, and then right in the...
First of all, I would like to congratulate the World Bank for introducing this Human Capital Index. It truly has the transformational power, and I'm delighted to hear from Annette about the reception, surprisingly good reaction it received from the government officials who can make a difference from the Ministries of Finance. My question is a little bit, I'm puzzled about 2 aspects of human capital which have been emphasized in the previous dialogue hugely, but they were somehow not captured in the index. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, whether they were considered and the reason why this may not have been relevant here. One of them is, of course, gender inequality. The issue has been emphasized again and again, and I think if you see the scatter diagram of countries where the human capital index is very high, there are lots of countries where gender inequality is extremely high. And quickly, the other aspect is about the citizenship and civic engagement. And the same that, you know, the whole idea that, as you just earlier said, Annette, that when the citizens are more engaged, the service delivery and the human capital outcomes are better. Yet there is no mention in the Human Capital Index about investing in civic engagement, which can also make a huge difference in the growth. And again, the ranking of countries reflects many countries where the civic engagement and civic space is being reduced.
Okay, thanks very much, Vinay. Over here.
Yes, I'm Lester Solomon from Johns Hopkins University. I noticed with interest Annette's comment about the difficulties of getting governments to invest in human capital because of the time span that's involved. They like short-term results, and that is not easy with governments. But there's an alternative instrument that can be used and has been used in countries around the world to invest precisely in human capital, in scientific advance, and so forth. And those are charitable endowments, charitable foundations. And one of the interesting realities, I think, of your index is that I think it will show that the countries that are lagging in these endowments outside of government, private charitable endowments, are frequently the ones also lagging in investment and the human capital investment. And the obvious reason for that is that you don't have rich individuals to invest. But there are many other assets available through which to build charitable endowments. The sale of state-owned enterprises, debt swaps, proceeds of extractive industries, and the huge amount of money sitting in banks as a result of bribes, of penalties, and so forth. We've discovered 600 foundations around the world that have created foundations out of these assets. and are attempting to pursue this as a strategy. And it seems to me that this could be a very useful component of a human capital investment strategy of the bank to promote this kind of an alternative vehicle for this investment process.
Okay, so thanks very much. Reflections on that. And then right there in the middle, and then we'll come back to the panel. Sorry to the others. You'll have other times.
Yes,
Please
thank
go
you very
ahead.
much. I am Andrew from Sierra Leone. Building on the last question, I just want to have a few clarifications on I want to know the difference between the Human Capital Index and the Human Development Index. And I would also want to know the frequency of measurement. Is it an annual index? Because to achieve a given level of outcome in human development, human capital, there is a huge measure of investment required. So how is it going to be measured, whether it's going to be annual or what is going to be the period that is going to be taken to do the measurement. The last question relates to the previous question. In a democracy, citizens normally reward politicians for short-term gains. And I asked the question whether, when and how we're going to measure, because the challenge we have in civil society is how do we make human capital or human development a political issue. So, and because politicians are rewarded on short-term investment or short-term gains, what incentives are you going to create within this index to ensure that politicians actually listen and pay attention? Thank you.
Okay, so we had 4 questions from Mauritania. This question of, can you say a little bit about best practices? From Vinay, the question of both gender equality and civic engagement, why are they not in the index? From Lester Solomon, this question of, can we tap other resources to fund investment? And then from Andrew, some specifics about the frequency, the long-term versus short-term gains. I'm going to go from outward in. So Pablo, you want to go first? And any reflections on any of those things? And then George, and then Annette will have the last word.
Thank you, Debbie. One of the investing in human capital is tackling by its heart the issue of inequality. And it's been said. And I understand that for some countries, the issue is not going to be solved within the country. They need other type of sources. But for most countries, it is a matter of mobilization of resources and basically a matter of tax paying for the future. And the issue here is that unlike the spending side, there is much less information on the revenue side. So if I may leave one to-do task for our community is to insist that we have to work much more on tax transparency in the countries so we can have a better informed debate on burdens, on privileges, on inequality, and therefore, and with those elements, address a discussion about investing where it is needed, but sometimes having some people losing in this decision. One example that might touch many of us, for instance, is public education at the university level. It is a heavy expenditure in many of our countries, but it is regressive. And this is just on the expenditure side, but there are many tax exemptions, tax expenditures that are also leading into more inequality, and I believe that there is much more information to be provided by government. It is somehow related to the charitable issue because in many of the countries there are no tax incentives to promote those kind of alternatives that you mentioned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. George.
Thank you. I would want to start with the political question. How do you make the human capital a political issue? I think that you need to be mindful about your own context. In our context, we are no longer talking about access. We are talking about both access and quality. And how do we talk about that? Using the budget, for example, as an entry point where we've been concerned about how much government is giving, allocating for goods and services and who is funding it. Especially in the case of Ghana where we are a lower middle income country, we are no longer attracting grants and all those. How do we get our own government from what Juan Pablo talked about, the revenue side, mobilize a lot more resources, but at the same time, devoting a lot more resources for goods and services side of the budget. That is where we can address the issue of quality. So ours, we talk about it. We tell government that you are not giving enough, for goods and services. You're over-concentrating on infrastructure, and so you make, succeed in building the schools, the health facilities, but they are not equipped. Teaching and learning materials are not there. So how do you justify the 92 or so percent of your education budget that you spend on people just to go and not to teach? And so this is how we have politicized it in terms of how the education system could be, could provide quality services. The same way in the case of health, for example, if we take the National Health Insurance, we have been looking at how government can resource the National Health Insurance Scheme as a way of taking care of the most vulnerable groups, in Ghana. So it's a political issue for us, but it depends on how you go about it. It means that you will need to look at the capacity available to do this, and here I must give a lot of credit to IBP, how they have supported us in improving on our capacity to raise some of these critical advocacy issues, where government also is ready to say that we will need to do something to address that. The last one I want to talk about is the best practices from Mauritania. Unfortunately, I may not have remedy to it, but what we have done is to build a critical mind from the civils, from the demand side, that people will begin to ask questions. People will begin to do the research. That's why I said that at the beginning, that we have, our experience tells us that when you have strong evidence backed by the people whose lives are affected by the situation, government will listen to you. So from your side as civil society activists, let us begin in improving on our own capacity so that we can engage technocrats and the politicians in a more constructive way. Your context might not be the same as mine, but I believe in deliberative dialogue where evidence is brought to the table and we talk about it and agree on commitment to seek improvement. That can push a lot of strengths from the demand side.
Okay, Annette.
Okay. I think first thing is that the index is measuring some outcomes in health and education, but it's really important to remember that you don't get good outcomes in health and education just from investing in health and education services. Now, there are many things which provide inputs to getting good human capital outcomes. Civic engagement might be one of them, but actually I think the most important is the family, actually, and the family as a social institution probably has the largest role, probably even more important than governments. But it is important to have a discussion about how public policy is supporting families to do their job well. So, for example, do poor families or vulnerable families have access to a safety net so that they don't go deeper into poverty when they have a crisis? So, that's an obvious one. But, is public policy supporting and encouraging girls to stay in school, delay marriage, and space their children, because that will be good for human capital outcomes as well. So really thinking about family policy and how public policy can actually support good human capital outcomes is pretty important. Now, what works? And this is a much longer debate, but what we do know is that the countries that do well have given relentless attention to human capital across political cycles. So they've made this something which is actually, now obviously if you have a single party country, then that helps. But if you make this something that transcends politics, that everybody in the society, there's a consensus that it's really important to invest in the next generation as well as the current generation. I think that helps. The other thing is I think that there's a huge role for the private sector in all of this, and this is also a much longer discussion because there are lots of government failures where the private sector is filling the gap. The quality of private provision can be really good or really bad, and it's important to actually have some visibility over the quality of private provision. But so too is there a lot of private investment, including from foundations, as you said. And there are actually foundations that are championing the human capital project and are putting their money behind it. And we have a number of individuals who have foundations who are doing it, including, for example, Dangote in some countries in Africa, I think in Nigeria. Really getting behind the human capital project and others that you probably well know. So I think there's lots to learn from countries that are doing well, but there's also some things that countries can do relatively quickly to fix things, and it's our job to help bring that knowledge.
Okay, so great kickoff. You have another 2.5 days to explore all the questions you still have. I think the way to think about the Human Capital Index is it's a tool. And it's a tool to help us look at issues that are really fundamental to the social contract. So what do governments provide to citizens? How are they making sure that all citizens are included? How do they make sure when they take resources, they're using them transparently and well? So issues on the revenue side, but also issues on the spending side. How do we make sure that those resources they say they're spending are really getting to outcomes and results that can drive economic growth and can really help the poor of the world in the future years to come. Lots and lots to go at, and a critical part of that social contract is the role that you all play in making sure that there's a dialogue between government and civil society to hold government's feet to the fire, to use the information that's out there, and to think about how we can all work together to do that and advance development more broadly. So we'll stop here, let you go have some lunch or coffee or something like that, and I'll be back a little bit later with Kristalina. Look forward to the ongoing discussions that you're going to have over the course of the next few days. Thank you so much to the panelists, to Annette, to Dirk, and Pablo.
Thank you very much to our panel. And we will hear more from Annette's team in particular later today and tomorrow. So before you depart, please focus your eyes on the front screen here. It's very important. So firstly, lunch is going to be served in what we call the Preston lobby, which is where you had breakfast. You will be able to eat your lunch either out there or in the Preston Lounge, which is through there. You cannot eat your lunch in here for various reasons, but you cannot eat your lunch in here. So you can go take it straight through to round tables there, and you can go into the atrium, which is that way, and that's all cordoned off for you there as well. So there are 3 places you can eat lunch, but not in here. Then we have 2 45-minute rounds of topics and discussions. Human capital, public finance, citizen engagement, social accountability, and knowledge and networking. And you'll see all of this in your program and in the app. Please choose 2 that you are not familiar with. We want you to learn, we want you to expand your expertise, and then that becomes of benefit to you. If you really don't need to go to something that you're an expert in. So the Human Capital Project will be in this auditorium. Public finance will be in MC10, and so on. And the Preston Lounge, as I mentioned, is the one through here. So you can choose which one you go to. You can actually register on the app if you like. That's helpful for numbers, so we know. But you've got to choose 2 of them. One starts at 1, one starts at 2, and we want you to be back here for coffee at 2:45 for the GPSA Spotlight session. So please take a picture of that, a note of that. Choose where you want to go. Challenge yourself to do something you haven't heard before. And enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you back here at 2:45. We have one announcement over here. Mike, please.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I just wanted to let you know that all the rooms that are here, MC, 10, 100, 7, 8, 100. So the numbers 7, 8, and 10 mean the floor of this building. And we want you to take the elevators that are closest to the Preston. And the rooms, the 100 rooms, are the closest one to the elevator. So you don't have to wander around this big and confusing building. Basically, all these rooms are above where we are located right now. And there are going to be also tomorrow some rooms that are right below us. But everything is in this section of the building. So that's how you will be able to find that. And there's also a team of us from GPSA. We'd be happy to direct you as well. But now enjoy your lunch and see you at the fundamentals. Thank you.
See you later. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch.